Welcome everyone to this Workplace EQ webinar series. My name is Grant Keaton. I am Head of Lifecycle Marketing at Tava Health, and I'm here with Tasha Jackson, who will be presenting us this information today. Tasha is our Clinical Director at Tava Health. She has a master's in mental health counseling and a PhD in education, and is a licensed professional counselor and maintains, in addition to all of her other responsibilities here at Tava Health, maintains a caseload of clients. And so if you sign up for Tava services, you may be lucky enough to work with Tasha Jackson. So excited to have you here with us, Tasha.
Thank you.
So I'll go through and explain a little bit how the structure of this is going to work. We're so excited to talk about anger. It's an exciting topic and a super interesting one, so I'm excited to talk through what we have prepared for you today. Tava Health, just as an intro, is a mental health partner for companies where we offer a mental health benefit, and employees of companies that offer this benefit can get matched with a counselor and meet with them online to take care of all sorts of any mental health questions or long-standing challenges that they have. If you're interested in learning more about how your company could get partner with Tava to offer these services, our website is tavahealth.com, or you can Google it and we'll be there. So this show will be recorded. We will share this recording with everyone after the fact, so you can watch it with all of your friends on a Friday night if you feel so inclined. As far as the structure of this goes, we'll be presenting some information. If you have questions at any time along the way, there's a couple options that you've got, two of which you can do at any time in the chat or the Q&A section here. We will be watching both of those and be able to respond to questions that are submitted to those in real time. Any questions that we don't respond to in the flow of the actual webinar, we are reserving 15 minutes at the end of this webinar for Q&A. So we'll present for about 45 minutes or so, and then any questions that have not been addressed or ones that come up, we'll be able to address those at the end. And so whatever option you like to exercise there. It shows that the chat is disabled. And so yeah, let's go ahead and then just use the Q&A section, and we will be able to answer questions that way. Thank you for noting that. Okay, so with that said, there may be people out there who are angry that we haven't started talking about the topic yet, Tasha. So why don't you go ahead and introduce what we're going to be talking through today?
All right, great. Thanks, Grant. Excited to be here today to talk about anger. I like to think of it as both powerful and often really misunderstood. And so a couple of goals for today are things that I'm hoping for us to get through. The first being to spend some time talking about why we experience anger. I know, as Grant mentioned, I get the privilege of working with clients still. And so this question I get asked a lot, like, oh, why am I so angry? What's going on, Tasha? So we'll spend a little bit of time today chatting about that. We're going to identify or talk about how to understand what anger is trying to tell us. You're going to hear me say that a lot today. Like, our anger is informing us, it's telling us something, and so we'll spend some time figuring out or talking about how do we get at what anger is trying to share with us. We'll spend a few minutes just talking about the difference between reacting versus responding. And then we're going to talk about some ways to respond to anger with intentionality. And that's really what I think the difference is between reacting and responding, that ability to be intentional with what do we want to do with this anger and what it's telling us. And then lastly, talk about some ways that we can manage when those around us are experiencing anger. Talk to be really uncomfortable when those we love or care about or spend time with are experiencing anger and we're not sure how to handle that or what to do. So we'll spend some time chatting about that as well.
Very cool. Sounds great.
All right, so we're going to jump right in. Let's talk about anger. What is it? So I'll start with a definition. Anger is an emotion that's characterized by an antagonism towards someone or something you feel has deliberately done you wrong, right? And so there's this sense of something has gone wrong, there was a deliberateness to it, and I'm having an emotional reaction to it, right? And I think anger is one of those things we can all sort of pull up in our minds and visualize what that feels like, right? We can all think of times where perhaps we've been angry. Some other things I think are worth pointing out and talking about with anger. First, all humans experience anger, right? I've heard people say, oh, I never get angry. Yeah, I think you do. Now, you may not express that anger, or maybe you're not comfortable, with identifying that, but we all do, right? And so all human beings experience anger. It is an emotion that developed. It is an adaptive response, right? And so it's an emotion that's really helped to keep us as a species alive, right? And help us to navigate perceived threats. So all of us experience anger at some point.
I was gonna say, Tasha, if there's someone that like this is why you're a therapist and I'm not, because someone says, "Oh, I don't ever get angry," I'd say, "You are lying. That is impossible." So I'm glad to hear you affirm, like, I guess this belief of we all experience anger. It's something that we've adapted to experience.
Yeah.
And it is very visceral, right? Like when of the emotions that we talk about, anger, it's so easy to identify. It's so easy to like feel those emotions come up with us. I think it's something that it's something that we all kind of share in common.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing I would say to that, Grant, is I think there is a visceral component to it, right? We're going to talk in just a minute about how it's kind of like it can be an energy that's really motivating. But I'm a little cautious to say that it's easy to identify. Now, we might feel what's happening to us internally, but if we don't have good language for it, or we're not comfortable with expressing it in that way. So it is something that everyone experiences and has. Our ability to be able to name that emotion may be a little bit more challenging for folks.
Real quick,
yeah.
I think that's great. I was just reading through the Q&A. There's a question on the definition that we've got here.
Mm-hmm.
Are there instances when we can we experience anger when we're due to other non-tangible things, as it's worded in the question? Anger when I read a disturbing news report, etc. Like
Absolutely.
Is it always a reaction to something where someone has deliberately done us wrong, or we feel that someone has deliberately done us wrong, or could be a little bit wider than that?
I think it can be a little bit wider than that. And I want to revisit that in a couple of minutes when we talk about what makes anger perhaps a little complicated, right? Because I think it is telling us something. I'd be curious about what else is going on with that. But yeah, I think certainly we can experience anger watching the news or reading a news article. I can certainly relate to that. So yeah. I think it is a bit broader. This is the like technical definition. Now the experience of it, I think, is probably a little different. Great question. And so anger would be described or thought of as a primary emotion. And so a primary emotion, just to give you a sense, we generally have primary, secondary emotions. Primary emotions are those that can be recognized and sort of manifested cross-culturally, right? And so it doesn't require necessary language to be able to identify it. We can see it on in expressions. And so because we can identify it that way across cultures, it would be considered a primary emotion. Depending on the particular theorist or theoretical sort of background or perspective that you come from, there could be 6, 7, perhaps 8 primary emotions. Anger always makes a list. Primary emotions could include things like fear, joy, sadness, disgust, contempt, surprise. Again, depending on the particular theorist, it could also include things like shame or guilt. But so anger is going to be a primary emotion, right? Again, something that every human being across cultures is going to experience. How we express that, certainly there may be some cultural differences there, but everyone experiences anger. And this last one might be a little bit surprising, but anger can be a good thing. right? Anger, again, as we sort of talked about, there is a motivating sort of energy that comes with anger, right? And so it can help to give us a way to express perhaps negative feelings or motivate us to find a solution to a problem. Often, I hear folks talk about or sort of describe anger as like a bad feeling, or have some judgment around it. But anger, like all the other feelings or other primary emotions, is telling us something, is valid, and is neither really good nor bad. It just is, or it's just one of those things that we experience. But it can be good in that it helps, again, to perhaps motivate us, give us some energy to address a problem or a challenge. Yeah, so looks like you have a question, Grant.
Yeah, well, I think this is one of the most fascinating aspects of anger. We so I think people maybe they have some maybe different opinions about this, right? So some people maybe because of the way they were brought up or whatever, they may feel really shameful potentially about being angry, right? They feel angry about something and then they instantly think, oh, that's not a good thing to feel. I shouldn't be feeling that way. And so there's this element of shame, like I'm bad because I feel angry. And other people may feel like I like being angry. You know, it's good. You know, I've heard people say that too. That like anger is a great thing, and I like it, and I cultivate it. You know, sometimes
Mm-hmm.
because for different reasons, right? So we have this complicated experience. So I guess what is helpful for us to when you're explaining that anger is neither good nor bad necessarily,
Mm-hmm.
how can that be helpful in us experiencing anger, dealing with it, etc.?
Yeah, great question. So I would say, whenever I hear should, right, it always makes me think of some judgment. And I think I'll go back to the very first point that all human beings experience anger, right? It's a feeling that all of us will have. And so it's part of the human experience. And that's what I mean when I say it's neither good nor bad. Now, where folks may run into some challenges might be around the way that they express their anger, right? Now that there may be healthier or more appropriate or more intentional ways to manage one's anger, but the experience of it, again, is a normal, so to speak, or expected part of the human experience. And so for the folks who are like, oh, I feel badly that I'm feeling angry, I would challenge that thinking just a little bit to say that our anger, again, is just part of the human experience, right? It's one of the things that helps to make us human.
So yeah, and so I think there's people we may get mixed up a little bit about what you drew a distinction between the feeling and then how we react to that feeling, right?
Mhm.
The feeling maybe isn't bad. We shouldn't feel bad about something that everybody experiences, right? But we may be like we may be on the playground we learned that screaming and hitting somebody else or something because we are angry is bad, and so we kind of tied those together. So it seems like it's helpful to distinguish those two. Is that
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I think, again, lots of us don't have great language around this kind of stuff, right? I think to use your example, those two things, the feeling and the behavior sort of get conflated together, right? You're out on the playground. It's okay to be angry, right? Perhaps your feelings are hurt or you're feeling left out from the group, right? And so, yeah, it makes lots of sense that you might feel angry about that. Where we run into some challenges is we don't want to be running around hitting other kids on the playground and stuff, right? But often we don't do a good job of drawing that distinction to say like, hey, you can absolutely be angry, but we don't get to smack the other kids on the playground because of that.
Yeah, well, and I know we'll talk about this a little bit later, but obviously this has workplace adult implications
For
as
sure.
well, right? Um, and I assume the same rule applies. It's okay to be angry, to experience certain things that in fact will help us uh, come to resolutions and things like that. But you can't be proverbially running around the office hitting people when you're
Right,
upset about
literally
something.
or metaphorically. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I feel like anger is kind of like the anti-hero of the emotions, right? Where it's like a Dexter or a, you know, or where it's like it's bad, but it's kind of good. We kind of like it, but it's also frowned upon sometimes or whatever. So it's very different than a lot of the other emotions, I think, right?
For sure. Yeah. And so let's chat about some of those other differences. Um, and so anger, I think, as Grant sort of alluded to, differs from some other emotions in some key ways. And this may help to um, contribute to some of the mystery around anger. And so this first one we've already talked about a little bit, but anger again can be really motivating, right? It's this energy sometimes that kind of builds up inside of us, and it can motivate us to act. It can motivate us to problem solve. It can motivate us in lots of different ways, right? Because again, there's that energy for many folks that comes along with anger. Um, Anger does not want to be ignored and yearns to sort of be expressed. And again, we're going to talk about how do we do this thoughtfully or intentionally, right? We want to honor what it is that anger is wanting to express, right? But anger does not want to be ignored. And so I think that's really important to keep in mind.
Hmm.
We've seen it where anger can be sort of turned inward, right? Where we sort of take it out like on ourselves, right? Or punish ourselves or whatever the case may be related to that anger, or we can react outwardly, right? The kid smacking the other kids on the playground. I will say in my experience, there are some broad gender differences, and I think some of this has to do with sort of socialization as young people, right? In terms of emotions that are acceptable for varying genders to express. And so generally, right, these are gross generalizations, right? So I'll caveat it with saying that, but in general, little boys are socialized that it's okay to be angry and aggressive and use that to motivate themselves, right? We really encourage that. Generally, or again, more broadly, right, when we're thinking about our young girls, we're wanting them to be a little more demure. We don't want them acting out in that way. And so, again, all of us are going to be feeling anger. We're just going to find different ways with which to express it, whether that's that outward expression of it, or I'm going to maybe internalize it in some way. I want to take us back to the second point, right? Anger does not want to be ignored. If we try to ignore it or repress it or suppress it, it can really impact our physical health, right? Our blood pressure. I saw studies that say that folks that don't do a good job of expressing their anger may be a higher risk for things like cancer and some other medical challenges. But I think the point that's worth noting is, again, if we ignore anger does not want to be ignored, right? And it's going to find a way to communicate that to us. And that could be through our physical health.
Tasha, I have a question about
Yeah.
these 2 points I think are super interesting. And so when I think of turned outward versus turned inward, um, obviously outward is obvious. It's the observable behavior, right? You're yelling, you're tantruming, you're whatever. You're throwing the remote control or whatever, your phone across the room. But the inward potentially so say I'm a person who if my feelings are hurt, I don't tend to express that. I tend to I might say like the way that I turn inward with that is like I am either self-critical or critical of someone else in silence, kind of a thing. Like my feelings have been hurt. And versus someone who, when my feelings are hurt, I lash out and I say mean things or whatever. I wonder if in the socialization aspect of things, what your perspective on, obviously if you lash out at someone we're taught from a very young age, that's not appropriate behavior. And in, maybe say like a relationship, like that's obviously out of, inappropriate, like not cool, not good for the relationship. Um, is there a similar side of that on the other side of things where you're not expressing anger, or you're not, you're turning inward more, that maybe, like, is that a better way necessarily? Is it more or less helpful? What's your thought on that?
Is the question, is it better to turn anger inward or outward?
Yeah, I wonder if some people think, well, it's better for me to be angry in silence versus outwardly angry, because I've gotten in trouble for being outwardly angry before.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I would, again, I think anger needs to be expressed, and there's lots of different ways that we can do that, right? It could be if someone wrongs you or hurts your feelings, it could be letting them know that they've done that. It could also be journaling about it, talking to a therapist, right? But allowing yourself to experience that anger, and then find the way that feels best and most healthy and doesn't create additional pain, I think is sort of the ideal. And that could be, like I said, talking to the person that's harmed you. It could be talking with a therapist about it. It could be journaling about it. There's lots of ways to do it. I don't necessarily think that one is better than the other. It's just thinking about what's happened and what do I need to be able to express this anger, and what does that look like for me?
So when we say expressed, are we talking about, it sounds like we're talking about communication, right? Like anger yearns, when we experience anger, we are motivated to communicate that anger somehow. Um, and is that, so communicating that anger is, it sounds like something that's helpful in dealing with it. Would you say that's true?
Yes, and I would say yes, with the caveat being that communication can be verbal, it can be behavioral, right? It needs to, something has to happen, right? And so it could be communication via our words, communication via our behavior.
Very good. Cool.
All right, so we'll sort of revisit this last point. So anger can be complicated. I often think of it as sort of multi-layered. And so what makes anger so complicated? I often think about or describe anger with people that I'm working with. I like to visualize it or think about it as an iceberg, right? And so this is our very modern take on an iceberg here on the slide. But what do we know about icebergs, right? We know that, well, from Titanic, that usually you just see a little tiny bit at the top that's above the water. There's so much often that we don't see, right? That's under the surface. And so for many folks, anger is really just the tip of that iceberg, right? Again, it comes with some visceral, right, sort of stuff happening internally, so it's a little bit easier to see. But the thing that makes anger so interesting and mysterious and complicated is that there's a world of stuff often underneath, right, that is fueling or contributing or impacting the way that we're experiencing that anger. And so things that could be sort of underneath, under the surface of anger, really could be any feeling, but common ones that I see with folks or hear folks talk about are things such as sadness, disappointment, embarrassment, hurt, feeling pain or frustration, perhaps some grief or guilt or shame or feeling of helplessness, or I'm just uncomfortable. And those can be really challenging feelings to express. And so we often can see them masked or connected with anger.
So this is extremely interesting, I think. So like, I'm trying to think of a couple examples. So let's say in a workplace example, for example, we're in a meeting. I present some findings and provide a recommendation for a plan of action, and someone else presents another perspective or some other data that basically debunks my recommendation, calls into question my judgment in that scenario. I'm now mad at that person. The meeting's over and I am fuming. And so I'm feeling angry in that moment. So what might be the under the iceberg element to that anger? Because all I know is I just want to chew that person out, or whatever.
Yeah. You're calling your friends and telling them what a jerk that guy is, right?
Yeah,
Like, the
I'm gonna
nerve of this guy.
complain, and I'm gonna, yeah, exactly.
Oh yeah. I don't know anything about them. Never had that happen. No, I'm kidding.
Are you
Yeah,
saying
well, I
you
think it
never
was really
feel angry, Tasha? Is that what you're saying?
feel angry plenty. But I think even in the telling of the story, I picked up on something that you said that I think could be a clue, right? And this is why, like, sometimes talking about this stuff can be really helpful, particularly before we move into responding. You said that, they're presenting something that calls into question my judgment. Right. And so if that's the thought that we're having, right, that this person presented this stuff and called into question my judgment, I might feel embarrassed. I might feel worthless, right? I might, there could be a lot of things that could potentially be going on underneath, right? And so that can be really helpful information, right? Am I feeling embarrassed, right? My boss was in the room, and I think that they're going to look at me differently, right? Or am I going to lose my job, right? We start to wonder perhaps about those things. And so if we react from a place of anger, right, which I'm sure folks have, we call that guy up, or we slack him. Oh, I can't believe you would do that to me. You made me look terrible. You're such a jerk, right? We're telling our friends how terrible this person is. But if we can connect with that feeling of perhaps embarrassment or worthlessness, right, we can perhaps respond a little bit differently. I'm feeling embarrassed. Well, why, right? Am I feeling like it's not okay to make mistakes or think differently about things or have different perspectives from folks? And then considering whatever that might be, that's going to help you to figure out how you want to respond to that.
Very cool. Yeah. Very
Does that make
interesting.
sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And if anybody listening to the webinar, you've got a scenario, personal or professional, you want to throw out there, we can workshop it here. Maybe we've got some time to do that a little bit later too, but there's a million different ways I think that we could look at this and get some insight. So I think this is very, very helpful.
Yeah, I'll share an example. I get to work with lots of couples, which I love to do. And often they'll come into sessions having had some sort of conflict, right? There's some anger. And it'll be something like, just my partner didn't take out the trash. I'm angry about that, right? Can you believe the nerve of them, Tasha? I've talked to them over and over and over again in our sessions about taking out the trash, and they don't take it out. What is wrong with them? I'm so angry with them, right? Anyone can relate to this experience. And what I often work with them is that you can react from a place of anger, right? What does that look like? It's yelling at them, it's hopping around, it's taking the trash out, it's being resentful. Or you can say, what's really going on underneath all of that? And I'll often say to my couples, like, it's not about the trash, right? It's not about the fact that the trash didn't go out. What's happening underneath? And so in that example, it could be that a partner who is upset about the trash not going out doesn't feel heard or listened to or respected in their relationship, right? Like, this is something that's important to me and I've expressed it, and I feel like that need's not being met. That's a different conversation that you're now having with your partner to say, this is really important to me. I want to feel valued and heard and understood in the relationship. You're able to say that to your partner. They're going to be able to hear that differently than, you're such a jerk. You never remember to take out the trash. You clearly don't love me or value our relationship, or any, wherever else that might go. And so I'll say to them all the time. I've couples that I work with, they're like, we know, Tasha, it's not about the trash. It's not about the screened in porch. It's not about this thing, right? But I feel angry about that. And the anger is cluing us into what it is that's going on underneath. And that's the thing that we can really work with and dive into.
So, and it sounds like that anger, this is where we're talking about the anger can provide valuable information, right? So extremely upset, or let's say my wife is extremely upset at me for not taking out the trash. And I say, whoa, it's like the garbage. It's not that big a deal. And but I don't understand the meaning maybe that she's assigning to that activity, which might be that she doesn't feel supported in the relationship. She feels like maybe things are off balance a little bit. And I can then go back and say, okay, what are all the ways potentially that maybe our relationship is out of balance, and address those. And if I forget to take out the trash one day, all of a sudden it's not that big a deal because we've worked on it in all the different areas as well. And
right.
So we've gotten to the root of the problem versus hacking at the leaves kind of a thing.
Right, right. Yeah, the issue is not necessarily the trash. The issue in the example you gave is I'm not feeling supported, which can lead me to feel angry, right? And so it's, again, we're seeing anger, the tip of the iceberg. That's the stuff that we can see and easily sort of connect with. But if we pause for a few minutes, what's underneath of that, right? I'm not feeling supported. I'm not feeling heard. I'm not feeling listened to. I'm embarrassed. I'm feeling helpless or scared or any number of things.
Yeah.
I think, and that's the magic, I think, of anger, right? Is it really, if we can pause long enough, can access a whole bunch of other stuff underneath of that. It can really be meaningful and help to transform the way that we respond, the way that we engage in our relationships, the way we show up at work, and all of those places that are meaningful for us.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think the other reason why this is important is anger has a tendency to mask, right? All I feel is anger, and we don't, I think, instinctively dig into it a little bit. We say all I know is that I'm angry, but kind of stepping back takes it out of maybe that out of that like just pure emotional state to like more kind of a rational, effective problem solving state. I love that. I've got a couple questions that have to do with this next section. One, what questions should I ask myself when I feel angry? And I think this is exactly what we're going to be talking about in this next section. So let's just jump to that.
Great. I'm writing that down. I want to make sure I talk on that. What should I ask myself? All right. Yeah. So that's a great segue to start to think about how do we respond to anger, right? Again, that's the tip of the iceberg. It comes in hot, right? We feel it. But now, right, we're gaining some awareness that, wait, there might be something going on underneath. And so,
Tasha,
yes.
I don't want to steal your thunder, but we had one of our participants, I think I use this responding word. And I think this is so great. So I just want to read it. This isn't so it's not a question of, but just a comment regarding being a reactor versus a responder. I often tell people that we need to learn how to be a responder instead of a reactor. And responding allows us the opportunity to think before we speak and calm down from being on 100. When we react, it matches that other person's energy and can escalate the situation. I think that's so insightful.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I don't know that I could have extrapolated or said that the difference between that any better. Can you give that to me one more time? Because I think it is incredibly spot on and poignant to understand what we're driving towards and the why behind that.
Yeah, so there's a difference between, we're drawing a distinction between responding and reacting. And reacting is kind of that instinctual, instant lash out, maybe potentially kind of effect of anger. And responding allows us the opportunity to think before we speak and calm down from being on 100. When we react, it matches that other person's energy and it can escalate the situation.
Yep, exactly right.
Yeah, I think that's great. Thank you so much. So yeah, let's walk through what you've got here. So now we're talking about responding. How do we give ourselves that space between the stimulus and response, and so we can handle that situation appropriately?
Yep. Yeah, I love that you use the word space, because I was thinking of pause, right? That the difference between reacting and responding is that we just pause long enough to consider what our options are, to not just come from that sort of instinctual or high energy sort of elevated place. And so what can we do when we're in that pause, or taking that space, or taking that moment to think before we speak, or that moment to think before we behave, right? And I think it's important to understand, like, what was it that was going on for me, or was going on externally to me when I started to feel angry, right? So I have on here, like, understand what triggered the anger, like what was happening, right? You were in a meeting, somebody said this thing, this is the thought that I had, right? And so start to really understand and look at from varying perspectives, what was going on in my mind, what was I thinking, what might I have been feeling, what was happening external to me, and that helps to give us some information about what the feelings underneath might be. If we get a better sense of, like, what was the particular thing that was upsetting or angering to me in this moment, right?
Tasha, sometimes I hear this described as the story, right? So I'm revisiting in my mind, okay, I said this, and then John said this, and the story that I told myself about what he said was that my judgment is not sound, or something like that. I interpreted, what was my interpretation of those events, and that's so it's like, what happened and how did I interpret those? What's the story there?
Yeah. Exactly right. Yeah. So the first part is to understand the what happened, right? What's going on, again, sort of internally, right? My internal world. So what's happening in my thoughts, what's happening to me physically, what's happening in my external world. And then, like I said, what's the story? Or I often say, like, what meaning are we putting on that, right? Once we have a better sense of that, we can then start to identify or figure out, what is the emotion that's connected with that? What emotion is coming up with me when I think about that story, when I think about John sharing a perspective that was different from mine, and calling my judgment into question. What does that feel like for me, right? That brings up feelings again of perhaps embarrassment or incompetence, or whatever that might be, right? So it's important to get a sense of what's happening, what feeling then is associated with that. Sort of simultaneously, or after that, we want to make sure that we're doing things to help ourselves to feel calmer. So some self-soothing stuff, right? This again is that space, that pause. We do not, while anger does not want to be ignored, it doesn't necessarily need to be dealt with in exactly that second, that moment that you're experiencing it, right? And so we can take some time to bring our physiology back down, to calm ourselves, to take a step outside of that narrative or that story that we've got running in our minds. And then once we have a clear sense of what was the thing that happened, how did that make me feel, then we can then get to the place of, what do I want to do about that? Right? And that's where the response comes in. How do I want to respond to the thing that happened and how it made me feel? How do I want to communicate that? And that could be, Grant, like you mentioned, it could very well be verbal communication to the person. Like, hey, when I come home from work and the trash isn't taken out, I feel unsupported, or like my needs aren't important in this relationship. And so I'd love, if we can talk about some ways to make sure that we're both feeling supported, or here's some things that I would need, to make sure that I'm feeling supported. What a different response and conversation than coming in and banging all the stuff around in the kitchen because you come in and the trash is not out, right, after you've had a long day at work.
Yeah, I love that. Someone asked a question that made me smile, because this is me exactly. Another example. Any tips specifically dealing with anger that comes on instantly when driving, when you have no real time to think? Suggestions to calm yourself quickly. I think this is great, and I'm very interested in what you have to say. I'm gonna write this down.
Grant, did you send this question in?
No. No, it's just someone I'm connecting with through emotionally through the webinar land.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would probably jump to I think what you're asking about is this thirst, right? How do you calm yourself down? I think we're in the car, we're driving, something that we have immediate access to is to think about our breathing, right? Take some like deep breaths, right? Like bring it in, you want to hold it, and then like let it all out. You know, and so that breathing can do a lot to bring our physiology down. And I think that's the kind of stuff that can be super important in moments like that. It could also be addressing your thinking, like what am I thinking that's making me angry when this is happening, right? Am I angry because this car is moving really slow in front of me and I'm late, right? You know, what is the thought that's going? So when you take those few sort of cleansing, like deep breaths, right? Like not just your regular sort of shallow breathing, but being really intentional to take a deep breath in, right? Maybe even hold it and then just like let it all out. Then think about what's the thought that I'm having? Again, like what's the thought that I'm having? Like what's making me feel really angry? Do I feel like, again, they're blocking me from being on time to work or whatever that might be?
Yeah, so another example from Grant's personal life. We just got back from vacation and we were in the airport, and I was super exhausted. It had been a really busy trip, and I was mad at everybody, everything, and I kept thinking, gosh, why am I so angry at this flight attendant who's just asking me if I want something to drink? I'm like, don't bother me, you know, and I'm realizing that. So for me, it was helpful to realize that I am tired, I'm on edge because there's all these things going on, and maybe give myself a little bit more patience in that moment. So, you know, in that scenario, if I were driving or something and I was having some road rage come on, to me, I find it's helpful to say, I'm a little uptight right now because of certain things that are going on. I'm going to try and just exercise, you know, give people a little bit extra grace because I know that I am not in a good place, that, you know, where I'm being very tolerant.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good example, sort of like understand like what's triggering you, right? You're, like you said, you're coming home from vacation, you're tired, you're traveling with the kids, you're thinking about what you have to do tomorrow. You know, I have to unpack all this stuff, I have to get back to work, right? That again, that has to do with like what's going on for me both internally and externally.
Yeah, I think that's great. Another comment I think was really good. When driving, I try to remember that everyone is going through something. Perhaps there is a family member ill, stressed at work, or now they are also running late, or going through a divorce, etc. We've all been there, and that helps me to decompress. So I totally agree with that as well. Putting yourself, you know, trying to say we're all the same, we all experience the same things. Try and, you know, put yourself in other people's shoes. I think that can have a kind of a calming effect as well. So that's just another strategy to maybe try.
Yep. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and I think that just that to me is just demonstrating grace and kindness towards others, right? That we really have no idea what's going on for them internally. Most of the time, we don't even know what's going on for ourselves internally. So we definitely don't know what's going on with others. Which I think actually is a unplanned but decent segue to like what do we do when others around us are angry, right? As I just said, like sometimes we have a hard time knowing what's going on with us. How are we supposed to figure out what's going on with someone else? All we know is that they are angry, right? And so what do we do?
And Tasha, I'll just say there was also another question that came in that says, how do you support someone else in their anger? So maybe they're not angry at you, but they're, you know, maybe they're experiencing a lot of anger. How do you support them as a friend, a partner, or a colleague, something like that? So if we can include that in this discussion, that'll be great.
Yeah. So yeah, if you are around someone who is angry, whether they're angry at you or angry in general, I think much of what I'm about to talk about can apply in both of those scenarios. So the first one being, and no, it can be really hard, but try not to take it personally. As we've just talked about, right? If I'm angry, right, me, Tasha, I'm experiencing anger, it's because of something that's going on internally. Now that may be a response to something external, but there's something that's going on in here that's I'm having some feelings about, some emotions about, that's leading me to feel angry. That is not necessarily because of another person. And so when we're around people who are angry, I work really hard to not take that personal, right? So that's the first thing. So that's some of that internal self-talk that we're doing, right? We want to validate how they're feeling. Now, I want to make sure that I make a very clear distinction here. I think we talked about it a little bit earlier, but I want to make sure that it's super clear here. It is okay to feel angry. In fact, there's lots of situations where lots of us would feel angry, right? So we can absolutely, when someone is feeling angry, they're feeling like they've been wronged in some way, we want to validate that feeling, the feeling of anger is a-okay. I get it. You can be angry. Now, where we're not going to validate is when there are behaviors that are harmful, right? So again, the feeling, the internal feeling of being angry, a-okay. We can absolutely validate that. I get that you're angry. I'd be angry too. That sounds like such a difficult situation, right? Like we can validate the feeling. We do not necessarily need to validate the behavior, right? Now you can be angry, but you're not going to yell at me. You can be angry, but you're not going to smack your brother. You can be angry, but you can't, send nasty Slack messages, right? Like yes, you can be angry. I get that. That makes sense to me. I understand it. From where you're sitting and what happened, that it makes a ton of sense that you would feel angry. And then again, we want to make sure there's that line that's drawn. Now the behavior may be something different. So the feeling of anger, absolutely a-okay. We want to be thoughtful again, like how are we responding to that anger? So I want to make sure that I maybe belabored that point, but I think it's important. We're not saying like it's okay to treat me badly because you're angry. We are saying it is okay to feel anger. Does that make sense, Grant?
Yeah, it does. I think that's really great. There's a again, it's kind of the reaction or like the feeling versus the behavior thing that we talked about earlier, and I think it's also there's a distinction maybe we can draw between de-escalating and dismissing, right? I think it's okay for yourself and interacting with others to try and de-escalate, maybe turn a situation less volatile, where maybe we're going to say things we regret, do things we regret, things like that, but not say that it's not okay. This feeling, it doesn't make sense for you to feel the way you're feeling. Like you're being irrational. You're being ridiculous, dismissing the way that person feels, or dismissing the way that you feel. Like I shouldn't be angry. This is not a good feeling. I'm being irrational. I'm being ridiculous. Neither of those things are helpful. Dismissing it isn't helpful, but
yeah,
de-escalating can be.
Yeah. And I think I agree. And I think the thing that helps to get us to de-escalation is that validation. What that validation is doing is saying, like, I hear you, right? I get it. I understand. And that will help to potentially de-escalate what's happening versus like, oh, you shouldn't be angry, or that's a silly thing to be upset about. That is not validating, that doesn't have the other person feel heard or understood. And they potentially could be more entrenched in their anger. Like, no, like you don't get it. This thing was so terrible, and may have the opposite effect of de-escalating, right?
It's the other side. When you talked about earlier of anger needs to be expressed, the way that resolves itself is that it's understood by someone else, right? I need to express it and I need someone else to understand it, and then brain or body or whatever says mission accomplished, right? So if you are able to say, I totally understand why when she said that you felt that way, that makes a lot of sense. Then it's like, okay, cool. I did the thing that I needed to do, and that brings it back down to a place where you can problem solve more.
Yep. And it gives you, again, that space, that pause for you to say, like, yeah, I get that. You can see why when they said that thing that you're experiencing anger, related to that. now what, right? And how do you want to respond to that? What does that look like for you? Which I think,
Tasha,
yes,
I'm so sorry. Before we move on, this is another good question.
yeah.
There may be a situation where you attempt to validate their feelings, but it just makes them more angry potentially.
Mm.
Um, I'm sure as a therapist you've experienced this. What tips maybe might you offer in that scenario?
Yeah, what I might do, there's a couple things that come to mind. I might say like, hey, like I'm sensing that you're angry, you know, and asking, you know, what do you need from me? How can I be supportive?
Hmm.
Um, Depending on what that de-escalation looks like, you may say like, you know, again, you're angry and I'm going to take some space, right, for a minute and give you a chance to maybe bring yourself down. Like maybe it's not something that someone external can do. So I might ask, like, how can I be supportive? Depending on like sort of what's happening, that's letting me know that the person is not able to de-escalate. I might say like for my own sanity, my own mental health, I'm gonna take some space, but I'm here when you're calmer, ready to talk or need me or want some support in that. Um, Again, sort of depending on like the situation, um, you know, I think there's lots of we can find behavioral ways to like try to bring ourselves down. Like, all right, you're angry. Like maybe we don't need to talk. Like, let's go for an angry walk together, or you know, like let's do something, right? Again, to help to bring some of that physiology. Maybe we can't calm the system through words, and so we have to calm the system through behaviors, perhaps.
That's great. I like how you turned the onus back on the other person a little bit, right? What do you need from me? How can I be supportive to you? Um, or I'm gonna give you a little bit of space. You know, let's take a break maybe, so that maybe you can, you know, and then when you're ready to talk about it, or when, you know, that might help. And I think also mentioning, like you said, that maybe it's not a talking thing, maybe it's a doing thing. Maybe there's lots of different ways that you can handle it together.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so that it can be a collaborative problem solving.
Yeah, I mean, I think about that behavioral one particularly. I'm the mom of a teenager, and so I think about like our little people that maybe struggle with that. Like maybe they don't quite have the words, or our words aren't landing for them, and so it might be like, all right, let me just walk with you. Let me just show you how to breathe through this to bring ourselves down. Like again, it might be behavioral as opposed to verbal.
That's great. Yeah. And maybe I'll just put a plug here. This is hard stuff. Like it's
Yeah.
sometimes we don't have all the ideas, but this is exactly what a therapist is trained to help with, right? So they do have some of those ideas, different things that you can try, or different language that you can use that maybe feels more safe or more accurate or whatever. Like these aren't things that we learned you know, in between our geography and algebra classes, right? They are things that can be learned, and so talking with a therapist either individually or as a couple, if it's a relationship situation, I think can be super helpful
Absolutely.
if you're feeling stuck.
Yeah, I'm certainly mindful of the time and want to make sure other folks have a chance to get some questions. The last thing I would say, obviously you've had a chance to look at some of the things here on the slide. I think we've communicated the important ones, but I wanted to just sort of highlight telling someone they need to calm down or don't be anxious or don't be angry, like generally has the opposite effect of what we're looking for. Um, and so perhaps again, it's saying like you need to calm down. Um, saying like I can sense that you're angry. Like what, you know, how can I support you, or what do you need to be able to calm down or to de-escalate or whatever that might be. But I have found that when we tell folks to not to do something or like you need to calm down, don't feel anxious, don't be angry, almost always we get the opposite effect of that. Because I think it can be dismissive and doesn't validate that, yeah, you are angry. That might not be that thing that you're telling me about. It might not be a thing that makes me angry, but I get like from where you are, your perspective, your narrative, the story that you're telling yourself, the meaning that you're applying to the stuff, like it makes you angry or you're feeling angry about it. So I think that's important to keep in mind. And the very last thing I'll say, like, again, there's that difference when you can absolutely feel angry. That doesn't mean that you get to do whatever you want behaviorally. And so if you find yourself around someone who is acting in a way that feels harmful for you, or hurtful to your, whatever the case may be, take care of yourself, right? You can remove yourself from that situation. You don't have to stay present. You don't have to continue to try to validate. In those moments, it's really important to sort of know your own emotional limits and what's happening for you in your inner world.
Yeah, I think that's so important. We want to be there for others and things like that. But I think taking care of ourselves will allow us to do that longer, right?
Yep.
I think that's great. So we did have, I think, one more slide here, Tasha, to talk about maybe some examples. We've had a chance to talk through several of those throughout the presentation. Maybe we can just flip it over for the last few minutes to a Q&A thing if there are any questions that folks have out there related to stuff that we talked about or anything else that you wanted to throw out. This time is yours to do that. Anything that we haven't covered so far? I know for me, when we're talking about taking space or giving someone else the space they need, I've learned that with my 5-year-old. She has a very strong will that will serve her well someday. But I've learned with her, like, she's not distractible when she's angry. Like, she just needs to have her moment. And when she's done, and she's not done before she's done. But after she's done, she's a lot. We're more able to talk with her and that kind of thing. So I think that's a great point.
Yeah, and what a great job you're doing in allowing her to be angry, right, and to experience that.
Well, what little you know about those interactions, given my explanation, I appreciate that compliment. I wouldn't say I always handle it extremely well.
Listen, we don't get it right all of the time.
Yeah.
I don't get it right all of the time.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that is a good, okay, question here. How do you deal with a person who has a very short fuse to calm them down?
That's a great question. Yeah, I guess it sort of depends on what the relationship is with that person. Is that someone that you work with? Is that someone that you love and live with? Is that your kid? But I would say I think much of the same things would apply. Being able to validate, maybe sharing with them what you've learned today, like, hey, I know that you feel angry a lot or have a short fuse. Like, did you know there might be other stuff going on under that? Have you thought about that? Have you, considered what that might be? Removing yourself, like if it's in those moments, right? If it's too much or feels unhealthy or unsafe or harmful to you in some way, hurting your feelings. If it's, someone that you love and live with or whatever the case may be, like couples therapy might be a place to address that. Again, I think that anger often, that's that first thing that we see. There's a world of stuff going on underneath, and that person may not have the language yet with which to be able to express that. And so trying to help them with that as best as you can while still taking good care of yourself.
That's great. So we're at time. Thank you everyone for joining. I think this is especially a helpful topic for our current environment, and hopefully we can all lend each other a little bit more grace and help each other work through things when things are hard. Again, if you have any questions, we're here. TavaHealth.com is our website. You can send us questions or learn more about what we offer. And thank thanks everyone for joining. Thank you, Tasha, for such a great presentation and sharing your insights.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thanks everyone for being here with us today.
We'll see you all next time.